Okay, good evening, one and all, and very, very special welcome to this very special lecture, because this is about something which is buzzword, I should say, right now, space tourism. Because recently we have witnessed two major means billionaires to the space, and which has opened a new vista or new form of tourism. Perhaps for those who want to, who can do anything, say, to go out of this, for that perhaps is a new venue. I came across while reading newspaper that there is one person who has almost traveled more than 100 countries, or now only space means a thing left. He wants to go up in the sky, because that is the where perhaps he need to go. All other places perhaps he has traveled extensively, or as a part of its say tourism itinerary. Now, all of you must be excited to know more about it. It's not as simple as like you pack your bag and go somewhere, or say you go to some hill station or at some other place of your choice. A lot of things involved in that, but that makes it very costly. Space travel, even sending anything to the space, is always a costly affair. But it involves a lot of health aspects also. So it may not be that easy. If any one of you want to, or maybe planning in future, perhaps it will be easy. But you need to go through a lot of things. You need to know a lot of concepts also about that. So that is the next frontier which we are going to witness. But we need to know a lot more things about that. What is space tourism? Who can go? Who cannot go? What are the say health conditions or the logistic required for that? So to tell all these about all those things, we have with us Dr. Punita Masarani. She will be taking us on this new tourism, or means new place, you can say venue, and tell us more about that. Let me introduce her to all our audience, especially welcoming to Dr. Punita Masarani, as well as all the members of Aeronautical Society of India, Mumbai branch, in whose collaboration we are organizing this special lecture for our special audience. She is an aerospace medicine specialist, a civilian alumni of Indian Air Force Institute of Aerospace Medicine, which is located in Bangalore. She is a senior aviation medicine examiner for assessing medical fitness for pilots, cabin crew, and air traffic controllers for 11 aviation regulatory authorities in the world, and practices at her medical center in Mumbai. She's trained from USA and Australia in testing, interpreting, evaluating, and assisting return to work for people with laboratory positive drugs or alcohol test results in industry. This is called medical review officer. She is a member of International Academy of Aviation and Space Medicine, and a fellow of Aeronautical Society of India, Indian Society of Aerospace Medicine, and Aerospace Medical Association, USA. She has many national and international presentations to her credit. Let me just say, add to this, in fact, we are coming up with a new gallery on aerospace. It was first made in 2003, and now very soon, post-pandemic, when physical movements will be allowed and people will be visiting us, we are going to open it. You can see more on these aspects in that gallery also. Okay, so stay in touch with us. Keep a watch on our website or in announcements when we are going to open for public. And then you can make a visit to this wonderful place, which we call it as a gym of science, where you can keep your science fit. Okay, with this brief introduction, I will request Dr. Punita Masarani to take over and start her deliberation. Dr. Punita, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Umesh, for your kind introduction. Let me share my screen with you. Mark Twain said, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things that you did not do than by the ones that you did do. So throw off the bowlines, sail away, Catch the trade winds in your sail. Explore, dream, and discover. Look at this picture. What does it remind you about? We know from mythology that our ancient sages, they were called the Puranakaras, they lived in the Puranic age some 5,000 years ago. We know, we've read the stories, that they moved freely from Earth to far-off planets, which they used to call Pitralok, Devlok, Indralok, Brahmalok. They didn't use any vehicles. They would just move so easily. And that actually began the space age. We didn't even know that, they were equipped with all the knowledge even at that time. In fact, there's a well-known theory based on astrophysics regarding space travel, which says that if there are twins and one brother stays on Earth, he grows older. And if the other one takes to space travel, he remains the same age. So let me share a story with you. If you look at the picture on the right, where you can see Brahmadev and two people standing in front of them, you must know what this is about. This story is about, it is mentioned in the Bhagavad Puran and the Vishnu Puran, and it refers to an event during the Treta Yuga. The oldest son of Revata, his name was Kakundi. He went on a space travel to Brahmalok with his daughter because this king wanted his daughter to wed the best person who was living on Earth at that time. He did not know who the right groom was. So he went to Brahma to ask his advice. When he went to Brahmalok, Brahmaji was busy with another visitor. So he said, please wait for a moment and I will attend to you. When that moment got over and their turn came to meet Brahma, Brahma said, do you know, Kakundi, one moment on Brahmalok is equal to 27 Treta Yugs or 216 years on Earth. So when you came here, all the grooms that would arrive at that time have all died. Time has moved on. And now, after 216 years, the current people who are living in the Yadava family, Krishna's elder brother Baldev is there, and he is the best person for your daughter. So go back to Earth and get your daughter married, Revati, married to Baladev. So you see, even at that time, when they used to travel to space and the time difference that they used to experience. Coming back to our times, the first human space flight recorded was on the Vostok in 1961, when cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin of the Soviet Union made one orbit around Earth. This is the time when the space age had begun in the 20th century following the Second World War. And this space age was between the Soviet Union and the United States because they wanted to prove who is more superior. They built multiple space stations by the name of Salyut, Almaz, Mir stations, and the US built the US lab, the US Skylab, sorry. Subsequently, in 1998, the International Space Station was built. This is a modular station which is in the low Earth orbit. And the International Space Station is a collaborative project by 5 participating agencies. The NASA from US, Roscosmos, that is, Roscosmos is the current Russia, the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, that's JAXA, the European Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency. But this was all for high-level research. Civilians or private citizens like you and me had never traveled to space. And that gave birth to space tourism for private citizens, where people wanted to go just to feel, experience the atmosphere and the thrill of being in space, not necessarily for research as astronauts. Before we go ahead, let me first clarify with you what exactly is space. An altitude above 100 kilometers above mean sea level, which is called the Kármán line, has been chosen by the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale as space. However, the Federal Aviation Administration of the US and the US Air Force consider an altitude of 50 miles, which is about 80.47 kilometers above sea level to be the altitude to qualify for space flight. So even if you cross this mark, it means that you have gone to space. All of you students would be knowing the layers of the atmosphere, but let me just quickly revise it for you. The troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, thermosphere, and the exosphere. So if you look at this picture, you will realize that 80 kilometers above mean sea level falls in the thermosphere. This is the place where space flights begin, and the International Space Station is also in this area. Do you know something very interesting about the thermosphere? This is a thick layer which lies between the mesosphere and the exosphere. Now, thermo, actually means heat, and the temperature in this layer can be as high as 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you really hang out over here, you will actually feel very, very cold. And that is because there aren't enough gas molecules in this layer to be able to transfer the heat to you. And therefore, you feel cold even in this kind of an atmosphere. When we talk about space flights, you will hear very often in my presentation and even otherwise that the flight was a suborbital flight, a low Earth orbit flight, and an orbital flight. So let us understand what that means. Anything above 80 kilometers is a suborbital flight. But if you go higher, beyond 100 kilometers, then you can enter the orbit. Now, the first 100 to 200 miles of the orbit is called the low Earth orbit, and this presents lesser challenges to space flights, and therefore most people, most orbital flights prefer to be in the low Earth orbit, but you can go higher and go into the real orbital flights. Where you fly, where your spaceship is, would depend on your mission. Are you going there for an experience? Are you going there for experimentation, or whatever the purpose depends on that, you will decide the altitude that you want to achieve. Orbital space flights, as I've already told you, is beyond 100 kilometers. What's interesting about this is that you remain in orbit. You do not free fall back to Earth. And that is because you are at an incredibly high speed, which is required to maintain that orbital velocity. But remember, for this, the flights they're very technically complexly designed, they're expensive, and they pose a lot of stresses on human beings. So a lot of preparation, training, and a lot of other things are required for people to stay in orbit. But we have had commercial orbital flights as well. In April 2001, Dennis Tito, we'll talk about him again a little later as well. Dennis Tito was the first commercial orbital space flight passenger. He went on the Russian Soyuz TMA launched vehicle. And after that, we had a couple of others who went as on these space orbital flights too. So why are they different from the typical astronauts? So they are not the people who were sent by the Soviet Union as cosmonauts or the US as astronauts. They went commercially. They paid to go on these flights. That was the difference. You can say a hi to all of these here in front of you. As I said earlier, it is not easy to fly in the orbit, and there are a lot of medical risks, and we need to counteract these risks if you want to stay there for a couple of days or longer. All these participants, including the ones you saw in the last picture, had to go through stringent selection standards. They had to undergo extensive training, and they had to adopt a lot of measures to counteract the challenges of that environment. Coming a little lower is the low Earth orbit. This is also orbital, but it's the low Earth orbit restricted to the first 100 to 200 miles of space. This is the easiest orbit to get in and stay. And the space shuttle and the International Space Stations conduct their operations here. Lower still is the suborbital space flight, where you just about touch 100 kilometers. It's about 80 kilometers, but up to say about 100 kilometers above mean sea level. What's different in this is that it's a trajectory that starts from the Earth, it intersects the atmosphere, it does not complete an orbital revolution, and it returns back to Earth to the point of takeoff. Its maximum flight speed is less than the orbital velocity. And when the engines are shut off, the passengers or the occupants will experience weightlessness for about 3 to 5 minutes. Exciting. The interesting thing about this is that you don't need very sophisticated training or medical measures. So that's the advantage of suborbital space flights. And that's where the recent space flights also had, that's what the recent ones had achieved. And we'll talk about that a little later. So space tourism, as I said, is more about space travel for the experience of it, maybe as recreation, at some stage as a vacation for people who can afford it. Because when NASA and USSR started taking tourists, that was very, very expensive, and they had to go through a lot of selection process, and that was not always easy for people. So a lot of industrialists, business ventures, and entrepreneurs decided that we must do something so that more and more people can travel to space. And that led to the development of space tourism. Let me take you through a couple of such ventures that are currently in vogue. The first one to start was in 1998, started by US billionaire Richard Garriott. He started Space Adventures. Now, this was the only private company that sent paying customers to orbital space. So it was more like a brokerage agency. They had a tie-up with the Russian Soyuz rocket. So if anybody wants to pay and go on the Russian Soyuz rocket to space, to be in orbit, you could do it through Space Adventures. And their first client was Tito. Remember, we mentioned about him a couple of slides earlier. And subsequently, they had 7 other paying passengers up to 2009. After 2009, they would have some of NASA's crew that used to travel on the Russian rockets. But in 2011, NASA shut the shuttle program. And then Space Adventures was not doing much for a while at that time. However, they continued having to modify Boeing aircraft that did what they called flights to take people up, just experience the arc and come back. Another company that we've heard of very often recently is Blue Origin. Blue Origin was started in the year 2000, by the CEO of Amazon, Jeff Bezos. Yes, we've been hearing about his flight very recently. He went up to space with his crew, and what he did is he used, you can see it on the picture, he used the reusable passenger rocket called the New Shepard, which also has a capsule on top. You can see in the picture that there's a white and blue capsule with Blue Origin written. Picture in the middle shows you the interior of the capsule, and the one on the top shows you the rocket New Shepard that was used. What they did is, it was a rocket launch, and it was a vertical launch, as you can see in the picture, and that can take up to 6 tourists. The launch site was West Texas, and on 20th July 2021, up went Mark Bezos, that's Jeff's brother. He's 82 years, and Oliver Demon, he's 18 years. Take a look at this.
Jeff, go, Mark, go, Polly, go, Oliver, you are going to space. All right, coming up here on Nico, main engine. Cutoff that will be followed shortly by separation. And at that point, after separation, we're going to let the astronauts unbuckle and take in the freedoms of zero G. There is Nico, main engine cutoff. A beautiful shot down the New Shepard rocket. Look at that view.
You can. But so did you take a look at that breathtaking flight? Can you hear me clearly now? Okay, so what did we see in that flight? We saw that the rocket New Shepard took off with the capsule, with the passengers. It went up into the atmosphere at Mach 3+ speed. The rocket accelerates into space. The occupants are experiencing more than 3 Gs in about 2 minutes. They go higher towards the Kármán line where 0 G begins. The capsule at this stage separates from the booster, and the participants can now experience weightlessness. They went up to the topmost altitude that was designed for the flight profile. In the meantime, the booster fell off and re-entered the atmosphere and landed safely, whereas the astronauts who were in the capsule, they experienced 3 to 4 minutes of weightlessness. Then they were requested to rebuckle again, take their seats, and they landed down with parachutes back to Earth at about 26 kilometers per hour. And they had a soft, gentle landing with the parachute into the West Texas desert. You see, they were happy and were successful. There's another company called Spacex, which was started in 2002 by Elon Musk of Tesla Motors. He had started by launching satellites on reusable rockets. He then made the Dragon spacecraft, which was used by NASA astronauts to go to the International Space Station in the year 2020. And now they're planning and preparing to fly 3 tourists for a 10-day trip to the International Space Station. They have a tie-up with Space Adventures. Remember that company that we spoke about in the beginning? So they have a tie-up with them, and they're planning to send 4 citizens, paying citizens, into orbit on the Dragon spacecraft. They also have a Japanese billionaire. You can see his picture here on the side. His name is Yusaku Maezawa. He said that he wants to take a chartered tourist flight around the moon on the SpaceX rockets. And SpaceX is also planning subsequently in future for trips to the moon and Mars. A lot of things happening. We've also heard about Virgin Galactic. In 2004, British entrepreneur Richard Branson created Virgin Galactic, and they aimed for suborbital flights. What did Richard do? He designed double fuselage mothership. That's the aircraft called the Night White II, also called as Eve. His mother's name is Eve, so he named the mothership Eve. This was attached to the Spaceship Two. If you see in the picture, the blue one in the center is the Spaceship Two, and the 2 aircrafts on the side white are the White Knight II mothership. The Spaceship Two accommodates 8 persons. They take off as normal aircraft would take off in a horizontal launch. Their launch site and their training facilities are at Spaceport in New Mexico. They undertook a recent flight on 11th July 2021 on Unity 22, and the occupants of this flight were Richard Branson himself, the 2 pilots, Dave McKay and Michael Masuki, and the other 3 were Beth Moses, Virgin's chief astronaut instructor, Colin Bennett, lead operations engineer, and Sirisha Bandala, the government affairs and research operations. Take a look.
5, 3, 2, 1, release. Fire.
Welcome to it. You're clear to extract. Welcome to space.
To all you kids down there, I was once a child with a dream, looking up to the stars. Now I'm an adult in a spaceship with lots of other wonderful adults looking down to our beautiful, beautiful Earth. For the next generation of dreamers, if we can do this, just imagine what you can do. This is unbelievable. This is too unbelievable.
Please return your seats and strap in. Approach for entry.
Okay, so the flight path that they took was that they took off from Spaceport in New Mexico as a regular flight at about 50,000 feet approximately. The Spaceship 2 separated from the White Knight 2, and it went vertically up. The rocket motor helped to ignite it. It took a vertical ascent. The passengers experienced up to +3 Gs. They went into suborbital flight. At that altitude, they could experience microgravity for about 3 to 4 minutes. And if you look at this picture very carefully, if you look at the wings, it is in the position of a feather. The advantage is that it becomes very light and it is very easy for the craft for re-entry into space, into the Earth's atmosphere. So it's the special feather technique of landing, which happens till about 50,000 feet, and then it becomes normal flaps, normal wings again, and then they glide back into the runway. There's another company called Space Perspective. If you look at this very fancy picture on the right, this company was started sometime in June of 2020. What they have done is that they have created a high altitude football-sized balloon, football field-sized balloon, which you can see on the right. And below is a pressurized capsule. Now, what they do is that they take you up with the concept of a hot air balloon. They help you to ascend up into the atmosphere. And from this altitude, you can visualize the curve of the Earth and you can see the blackness of outer space. But in this experience, you do not experience weightlessness, but you can look at the curvature of the Earth, and then after a few hours, it gradually comes down by releasing gas. So these are the ways that people would like to take you into space. But what if somebody wants to stay in the orbit? There are options for that as well. The International Space Station, which was built in 1998 so far, was meant only for people who wanted to do research and were on scientific programs. But very recently, in 2019, NASA has started allowing private citizens to visit the International Space Station for short visits. Now, whether NASA is going to have the same medical and training standards for these private citizens, we don't really know. But yes, the doors are opening. There's a company called Axiom Space, which was formed by Michael and Dr. Cam. And what this company does is it's a private company which trains private astronauts, because NASA is going to train their own astronauts. But Axiom Space says that, okay, if you're a private astronaut, we're going to train you. And they want to take the first fully private mission to the International Space Station. They're planning to take 3 astronauts on the SpaceX rocket sometime this year or early next year. They offer a proper 15-week expert training to these private astronauts. And what Axiom is also planning is that they are trying to do research on developing modules to create a new private space station, like the International Space Station has been created by the government for research purposes. But Axiom Space is now looking at developing various modules, which in someday can become a privately funded space station by itself. This obviously will be built in stages for now, and later on, when it's fully ready, it can become an independent, free-flowing station. And this will be open to visitors from different space agencies across the world and anybody who is willing to pay to go there. Look at this fancy picture here. Gateway Foundation is a California-based foundation, and they have formed the Gateway, which is a city with a spaceport, which means if you want to come into space, you can park your vehicle here, and then from here you can go beyond. So it's kind of a spaceport that they have created in space. Gateway Foundation has also created a Voyager class station, which is a rotating hotel. It's a rotating space station. And what's interesting about this is that they create artificial gravity, and they can change the artificial gravity by changing the rate of rotation. So depending on whether you want low gravity, high gravity, that can be modified. And why they've done this is to accommodate different national space agencies across the world. They can send their scientists, they can conduct research in low gravity environment, And it can also be a place or a hub for space tourists. Orion Space is another company. It's an aerospace startup by a person in the Silicon Valley in California by the name Frank Munger. And he plans to build a luxury hotel in the orbit called the Aurora Station. And he's saying that they can accommodate about 4 passengers and 2 crew for 12 days at a time. So all these people are actually tempting us to travel, to go, to probably stay there. But think about it. Do you think everybody can go up to space? What if I'm 80? Suppose I'm old. I'm sure age is not a barrier because Richard and Wally and all of them are, very senior, very experienced. They managed to go. But does that mean that everybody can go to space? And if normal people go, could they fall sick in space? Let's try and understand that. NASA selects the creme de la healthy creme, which means they select the best. They will do a lot of medical checks on you, put through a lot of simulators, and only if you qualify all of them will you be taken in. But that's not going to be the case for spaceflight passengers. You can't have such stringent criteria for paying citizens who want to go as tourists. So we are obviously going to be a lot more lenient with these situations, but we don't have much experience. We have very limited data available for space flight participants. So we learn as it comes. The government is not over-regulating this area because it's a new area and they want it to grow. They don't want to hinder the development. So what they're doing is they're offering working group recommendations, which means experts are giving advice, they're giving recommendations as to how should we go about it, and we all learn in the process. Unlike for pilots and astronauts, they haven't laid out any mandated regulations to determine eligibility. It's not that, okay, if you don't fit this checklist, you're out. They're not that stringent, they're not that severe. And the companies have to make their own no-fly standards because each company would have a different flight profile. They don't know they would know the type of launch. They would know the altitude that the passenger is going to. They would also know the purpose of the flight. Is it just the thrill or the experience or a vacation or research or, whatever the purpose. So depending on all those variables, each company will be able to decide who would be the right person to fly and who would probably have a problem and not be allowed. What is important is that medical informed consent has to be taken because the person who's going is paying for it and going as a volunteer. I mean, he is going, or he or she, is going for their own self. They're not being sponsored by anybody. So they are taking the responsibility that we understand that there could be risks involved. We understand that anything can go wrong and we would nobody liable for it. And we are solely responsible for our decision. So that is going to be a very, very important thing. As I said, we don't have much experience in this yet, and we're not able to simulate changes. Like for people who used to, the typical astronauts, we had a lot of simulation that could be done, a lot of training that could be done, but this is a relevantly new thing, so we cannot really simulate changes. And again, as I said, depending on the flight profile and the mission, the requirements would be different. But as the doors open, I'm sure in future, there will be people who have diseases, who have pacemakers, who have cancer, who have orthopedic disabilities, may want to fly. So the companies, what they're going to do is they are going to have some minimum screening and minimum training that they are going to be offering to every space flight passenger, especially for those who have no previous experience. Like Dennis, Tito, and a lot of others had some kind of experience in the past, whereas absolutely naive people who may not have any experience. So some kind of screening and training will be essential for them, but it will not be as extensive as it is done for the astronauts. The good news is that most people who are going purely for tourism are going for a short purpose, and these shorter duration flights eliminates a lot of concerns that we see in orbital flights. But the bad news is that we are not astronauts. Those are very highly trained pilots. They're already pilots, so they already meet very high medical standards. They're already trained into a lot of procedures, and they are now further trained to be astronauts. So they are a completely different category altogether. Now we are talking about absolutely normal. When I say normal, you know what I mean. They're not really into this field. So they could be all kinds of people, and they would be experiencing certain stressors like acceleration and microgravity for the first time. So it's going to be fun, but yeah, it's going to be very challenging as well. And especially if they have pre-existing medical conditions, which means if they already have a heart disease, or if they have, if they've had some major surgery before, or they have high blood pressure, we don't know how they're going to behave when they go to such flights. So yeah. There are some space health risks involved in these flights, definitely. And as I said earlier, it will depend on the space flight profile, the vehicle configuration, the destination that they're planning to achieve, the duration of exposure that we are expecting to microgravity, high speeds, and increased G-forces, and of course, pre-existing illnesses. The current flights that we spoke about in the two videos was the exposure to microgravities was about only 3 to 4 minutes. So there would be relatively less health risks in such kind of flights. But as I said, if people have pre-existing illnesses, they definitely need to be screened and looked after. In 2012, the FAA Center of Excellence offered medical standards recommendations for commercial space transportation. And what did they have to say? They said that for suborbital flights, every participant has to fill up a comprehensive medical questionnaire. What is this questionnaire? It's going to be a whole lot of questions about your health. They also have to undergo a physical examination by an aerospace medicine physician who understands the space environment. So he understands that, look, if you have this problem, this is what can happen to you if you go up there in space. And we're not going to be very strict saying that, okay, you have this, sorry, you don't meet the requirements. No. They've suggested that the company and the physician develop strategies and training for those who don't meet the medical standards so that we could try and accommodate them to the best possible capabilities. For orbital flights, of course, requirements are different and more stringent. They recommend an additional mental health screening. Have you ever thought, why a mental health screening? You know, in orbital flights, the duration of stay is a lot longer, unlike what we saw in the current videos. So if you had to stay up there in a place like that for a long time, even for a couple of days, it can get very different and very difficult. And not everybody can tolerate those kind of stresses. And that's the reason they recommend some kind of mental health screening for people who want to take orbital flights. A couple of additional tests like X-rays, pregnancy tests, drug tests, lung function tests, etc., to know how healthy you are and whether you will be able to tolerate the stresses of orbital flight. And after the flight is over, they also suggest post-flight evaluations and discussions. The reason is that if you've been up there for a couple of days, things could have changed in your body, and we need to check as to how you're doing. And you might take some time for readaptation back to Earth, because remember, you've been in microgravity for a while. So it does have some changes that take place in your body, and we need to evaluate those and to help you to adapt back to Earth. What about the pilots? The pilots require a minimum FAA second-class medical certificate. And the pilots, when they re-enter into the Earth's atmosphere, they do experience high levels of Gs. And we don't really know that if they keep going up and down for short periods of acceleration, and then they stay in microgravity, and then again they have deceleration, we don't really have too much data to tell us what exactly would happen to them. Because for passengers, for example, a person would go probably once in his lifetime, maximum twice, but the pilots would go a couple of times. So how that's going to affect his body and how he's going to respond to it, only time and more data will be able to have more definitive answers. We're expecting some kind of a push-pull effect on these pilots, but yes, we still have to see. So what really happens if your body is exposed to space flights or space? Let's understand something called as G forces. I've been talking about it for the last half an hour now, that you experience G forces. The three kind of G forces that you experience on the human body when you take these kind of flights. The vertical direction, head to toe, is the Z-axis. The chest to back, front to back, is the X-axis, and the side to side is the Y-axis. You can look at the positives and the negative signs in this picture, and let me explain to you what this is. The G forces are basically high acceleration forces. And when you launch up in a rocket, the engine boost will produce a plus Gx on your body. The nose high altitude will cause a plus 3Gz on your body. And when you re-enter back, the crew experiences plus 6Gz. But the passengers, because they are reclined, they experience the Gx forces. Now, if you look at this very fancy picture on the side, a white capsule, it's called the Human Centrifuge. I don't know how many of you have seen it before. I have had the experience to sit in it before. So it is, the person can actually sit in that capsule in the centrifuge. You can see it's suspended by a long arm, and this arm actually rotates. And the rotation causes acceleration, and this acceleration causes G forces to act on your body. And that way we can not only test, but also train people to tolerate high G levels. Now, why are we so worried about these G levels? Take a look at this picture. Remember an experience that you went to one of those thrill joyrides when you were sitting in a huge roller coaster. Look at these faces. Does it remind you of one of your experiences? You actually feel everything's just pulling down and you can see their faces. This is the plus GZ acceleration force. In this, the acceleration is headwards. What happens is that all the blood in your body is pulled downwards, because of which everything feels heavy. You feel you become very heavy, your face is heavy, your whole body is heavy, you almost cannot move yourself, and you cannot see because all the blood is just pulling down. So there isn't enough blood to even supply to your brain or the eyes. You feel that you're losing vision, you feel you're getting dizzy, you could even have a blackout or loss of consciousness. Why all this happens is because the heart has to pump so much harder, to circulate blood to the brain. Imagine all the blood is being pulled down into the lower legs, and the heart has to work really hard to push the blood up. Because if the heart can't do that enough, then there won't be enough blood going to the eyes, to the brain, and you could temporarily lose vision and just black out. But don't worry, it's temporary. Look at this picture and you will know what I was talking about. See, he almost just blacks out. What happens in this is, as I said, this pulling of blood in the lower extremities, lack of oxygen and blood supply to the eyes and the brain, and that causes the blackout. Now, there are certain factors that help to improve your tolerance to these forces. If you are a smoker, alcohol, if you're very, very exhausted, if you're dehydrated, if you have a sedentary lifestyle, or if you have certain heart diseases, then you cannot tolerate these plus G forces very well. And which means that such a person who has these factors could have a blackout or loss of consciousness much earlier than somebody who does not have these factors. Now we come to the minus GZ. In this, what happens is when you experience the minus GZ force, all the blood goes up to the brain. So you look at this man's picture, look at his eyes, you actually feel they're going to pop out, and look at his face, it's completely red. That's because all the blood is now moving. The acceleration is footward and the inertia is upward. So you see his face is congested, and because of a lot of blood coming to the head, he has a headache, he has blurring of vision, he has redness of vision. We don't really experience the minus GZs in these flights, so you have nothing to worry. The other force is the plus GX force. Now, this is the chest to back force. This is experienced during launch. What happens is that you feel a lot of pressure in the front of your chest. You feel there's a tight chest pain. Your eyes can't see clearly because all the blood is coming in front. The lungs are there, so you have breathing difficulty, you have speech difficulty, and this But in actually space flights, what happens is that you experience this only up to plus 3GX. Now, till plus 3GX, people might feel a little discomfort, but it's not that bad. But if it goes higher and higher, then it becomes difficult. But these flight profiles are designed in such a way that passengers would not experience anything more than plus 3GX. So we are good, but it's interesting for you to understand what that means. The other problem, the first one was the G forces. The other problem people could experience is oxygen deprivation. Well, and that's why we have screening that is done before we allow passengers to to participate in these space flights, because we don't want somebody who already has very low hemoglobin or oxygen deprivation problems like lung diseases and all to go up. But for healthy, normal people who don't have any of these problems, they can go. What is hypoxia? Hypoxia is when the body tissues are deprived of oxygen. Now, trust me, these spacecrafts are equipped with enough oxygen supply. So if at all a person needs it, there is always oxygen available on board. But how would you know that you need oxygen, right? Because the first thing that's impaired with hypoxia is your judgment. So the problem is that you may be hypoxic, but you would never realize it yourself. Somebody else who's not hypoxic would be able to realize and bring it to your attention. So the symptoms of hypoxia are numbness, confusion, nausea, breathing problems, irregular heartbeat. And if you don't recognize it and if you don't do something about it, well, it could lead to other complications. Doesn't really happen too often, but it's good to know that it's possible. This is interesting. On Earth, we are always under the influence of gravity, and therefore our body is used to, all the fluids are used to going downwards towards gravity, and always our heart has to work to push the blood towards the upper areas of the body. In weightlessness that you experience in space, what happens is that there is no gravity to keep this blood down. So all your body fluids, your blood is redistributed in the body. So if you look at this picture, this is a typical picture of a fluffy eye syndrome. You look at this man before he went up to microgravity, and because of the fluid redistribution, you can actually feel that his face has become fluffy. That's because of fluid redistribution. And the back of the eyeball also flattens, so people tend to have some vision problems. And this happens mainly in people who stay there for a much longer time. Again, does not happen in short suborbital flights. Even the heart, normally, there's a lot of pressure on the heart. So if you look at the picture, it's a little ovalish, but because there's no gravity in microgravity, so the heart becomes rounder and less elongated, and that itself could lead to some kind of heart issues. Again, more common in long-term flights. Neurovestibular effects, fancy word. Let's try and understand what this means. What happens is that when you take off, there's high G forces. Then you are in microgravity or 0G, and then you're again readapting to hyper G. Now, what happens is that there is a sudden change in speed, a sudden change in orientation, and our sensory organs in the ear, the inner ear, the cells in the inner ear responded to change in movement. Now, there is so much of change in movement, and so much of what you're seeing outside keeps changing all the time. So what happens is, if you look at the picture on the right where you see that duck, he's actually straight, but he has a feeling, what we call as an illusion, that he is going up. So to correct, he says, no, I'm not supposed to go up, let me go down. So even though he's actually going straight, but he believes that he should go down, and that can lead to trouble. That is what we call as the somatogravic illusion that can happen to pilots. Passengers really don't recognize this, but pilots could experience this because they are in control of the spacecraft, so they cannot afford to be disoriented. But yes, it can be possible. The other complication is the vestibular problems. Now, you know that our inner ear determines the body's orientation. So what happens is that when you are in space, again, there is no gravity, there's no sense of direction. There's nothing like down and up. It's all one, right? You could see them floating. So because there is no orientation, and because everything that you see is black, as I said earlier, there is disorientation that happens. Causes motion sickness, vomiting, vertigo, headaches. You feel everything's just going round and round. You can't balance yourself. This does happen to people. Now, how often it will happen, to whom it will happen, it's very difficult to say. And that's what we call space motion sickness. So if you go into orbital flights, this is very, very common, but very difficult to say. So if somebody already has a problem of motion sickness, then you definitely got to be careful, because then you have a very high chance of getting it in space as well. And this typically happens when the engines are cut off. So at that time, instead of experiencing microgravity, you will experience all the vomit coming on you. And along with this, you could have dizziness, sweating, severe nausea, vomiting. And imagine if there are other passengers next to you. Well, it's not a lot of fun. And therefore, it's important that you don't have these issues. But yes, as I said, for people who don't have problems of motion sickness, it's not too common to happen in suborbital short duration space flights. Can you prevent this? Well, you can take medications. If pilots are not allowed to take this medication, of course, but for space flight participants, yes, we do allow you to take medication. What's important is that you don't keep moving your head all the time on the round to look around, because the more movements you make of the head, the more chances are that you will get nauseous. Pilots are specially trained so that you don't need to worry. But for space flight participants, you should remain tightly strapped in your seats and not do provocating head movements unless you reach microgravity and they say that you can take your straps off. That's the only time. Till then, you should not move. And this, to a large extent, can prevent space motion sickness. What about post-flight medical problems? Now, in orbital flights, in people who've stayed there for a long time, we have seen that they experience a lot of changes when they were in microgravity, and therefore, when they came back into the Earth's gravity, they experienced a lot of medical problems, and then they had to readapt to gravity. But if we're talking about short duration exposures to microgravity, we're not really expecting people to have post-flight medical problems. There could be some problems like spatial orientation, because suddenly you're just lost because you've gone into high G forces, 0G, again high G forces, and then back on Earth. So as we said, some spatial orientation difficulties can be there. They say there is some research which says that they could be more susceptible to infections or illness because their immune system gets suppressed. And this happens because of some changes that happen at cellular level during space flights. But usually in short duration flights, we don't really expect too many problems. There are some interesting environmental stressors that can affect people. One is the spacecraft cabin environment itself. Remember, you're flying at a huge altitude. You're almost 100 kilometers above mean sea level. You are in a pressurized environment. In case there is decompression or loss of pressurization, there's going to be hypoxia and death. Well, when they design the craft, they take every measure into consideration to avoid this from happening. And therefore, the pilots are always recommended that they wear pressure suits and they undergo adequate physiological training so that they can manage these environments. And a lot of other factors, as I said, are taken into consideration while developing the design itself. Ionizing radiations. Now, what is ionizing radiation? It consists of subatomic particles that interact with biological tissue. Now, when these radiation enter your blood cells, they can cause genetic damage and can cause cell death, or they can also cause some dangerous mutations inside your cells. The good news is that in short duration flights, it's actually very minimal exposure, and they're not going to have any long-term effects on the cells and the biological tissues. The other advantage of short duration flights is that you would always look at the meteorological conditions, and if at a particular situation, at a particular time of launch, there is a lot of ionizing radiation in the atmosphere, you can always replan you go better with people who are working at the International Space Station, for example, they may not have the luxury and they could be more exposed to ionizing radiations. And the flight crew always wear what we call the dosimeters. Now, the dosimeter is a machine which they have, which measures the radiation that the person is exposed to. So you will always know if he's reaching a level that's not safe for his body. You can always plan it accordingly. The next environmental stressor that you experience in these flights is vibration. Now, imagine the amount of speed at which these vehicles are going up. There is bound to be vibration, even in short duration flights. Now, for a passenger, doesn't make so much of a difference, but for the pilot, yes, it could impair his performance, but again, they're trained into it. And at designing level itself, they take care as far as possible to minimize the vibration that both the pilots and the passengers are exposed to. The fourth and the last environmental stressor is the noise. You can only imagine, even if there is a rocket launch or a fighter aircraft takeoff, you know the amount of noise that is generated. So imagine a spacecraft taking off. There is intense combustion. There's a huge thrust that is required for this launch. And this is bound to create a large amount of noise. And if people are exposed to this acute noise, unprotected means you have nothing on your ears to protect yourself. And if you are exposed to this acute noise, then that can reduce your visual capacity for some time. It can cause nausea, disorientation, ear pain, headache, even your performance can go down. Verbal communication can go down, team interaction can be affected. And therefore, it's very, very important that both the passengers, participants, and the crew have adequate ear protection so that you can prevent hearing loss and you can have better communication. Now, we've seen so many things today, right? Right from the kind of companies that offer flights, some kind of hotels or options to stay. We've also seen the effects of all these things on your body, on the environment. Now, just give it a thought. All these companies that actually ventured to have space tourism a reality, how easy do you think that was? I tried to study the websites of all these companies, and there was one thing that came out very strikingly, and that it needed tremendous amount of planning, preparation, execution, monitoring, coordination, cooperation, and most importantly, in my opinion, teamwork. So this is just, I picked it up from one of their websites, but I'm sure it's similar across the board with any venture of this magnitude. You know, they have to take care of so many aspects, whether it's administration, communication, business development, the engineering part of it, dealing with the government requirements, human resources, having the right experts on your team. Because look, we have very little data to go by. We're actually learning in the process, and you want the best brains and actually new brains who are willing to think out of the box, who are willing to take risks, who are willing to try things with all the knowledge of science and research that is available to us. So everything has to be put together. It's a lot of trial and error, but you want to be as accurate as you possibly can, because a lot of money at stake, a lot of people at stake, and the huge risks involved, especially when you talk about taking passengers, paying passengers up there. So yeah, there's legal compliance, sales and marketing, operations, production, quality assurance, safety. There's a huge network, a huge team that you require. But I think if there is a will, if there's a determination, once you start off, the right resources start pulling in. What I'm trying to emphasize here is that it's huge teamwork and nothing can happen single-handed. What about the regulator's role? So if the regulatory agencies, the civil aviation authorities, the space agencies, what is their role in these flights? As I said sometime in the beginning of my talk, that because this is a relatively newer developing field, they're not being over stringent, but they also want to have oversight so that they can help and guide and recommend wherever required. They are involved in certifying the vehicles, whether the vehicles are safe enough for these flights. They recommend medical standards for pilots and the space flight passengers or participants. They offer training guidelines. They also think about the insurance and the liability issues. And they would also have to take care of accident investigations should there ever be a need. So it's, as I said, it's teamwork between people who are interested and people who can guide. There are going to be a couple of spin-offs, I'm sure, from ventures like this. It brings in a lot of cooperation and collaboration internationally. It's going to open a lot of opportunities to the younger generation to specialize in different fields in aerospace, engineering, production, technology, designing. Lots of new fields would be available. These companies would be able to offer some kind of trainings and internships to people who are really interested. And once they have gone up to space, they realize, they look at Earth in a very different way. What is right now, our life is just our home and our office or our work or our school, college, or just the little environment that we live in. But imagine going literally up there above the Earth and looking at Earth. It's a whole new perspective, and we respect our environment very, very differently at that time, because then you're looking with a very global perspective. So it gives us the opportunity of doing more for our environment. It opens plenty of opportunities for research and development. And of course, I'm sure it's a very, very long list. If you ask me honestly, what would I learn from all these things? What would I take back for myself? And I don't know if you would share the same thoughts, but that's what I have understood, that nothing great is ever easy. But there's got to be a first time. People may say it's impossible, but impossible can be also read as I am possible. Remember, to succeed, you must have a single-minded devotion to your goal. Winners are not those who don't fail. They are the ones who don't quit. Do you think that all these people who went up there did it just the first time? If you go and read their stories, you realize it's taken them more than a decade to achieve what they have achieved today. They've had multiple failures, multiple attempts, multiple things that they had to learn, relearn, unlearn. They could have given it up, but they didn't. And that is what makes the difference. And that I think itself is a huge take-home message, that if man can, just by his determination and with science and technology, manage to go up there, then a lot more is possible. Fail can also be read as first attempt in learning. End is effort never dies, and no is next opportunity. These are all some very famous and dear quotes from our dear past president, APJ Abdul Kalam. And I leave you all with two lovely quotations from him. If four things are followed, having a great aim, acquiring knowledge, hard work, and perseverance, then anything can be achieved. He says, look at the sky, we are not alone. The whole universe is friendly to us and conspires only to give the best to those who dream and work. All the best and good luck.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Punita. I think you have presented a much wider, a big canvas of space along with this space tourism. Means you have been given manifold information, I should say. It is not only the fun part of the recreation part of that, but a lot of things associated with that. And just I think a message is that it is not that easy, but we have a lot of things to learn out of it, and making it a reality. That itself has been in 20 years, starting from Tito to now to a common man. I think Bez has taken one paid passenger also in his flight. So you have covered extensively. I think it was a much bigger vision on that. Perhaps the children might, or our audience, they must be feeling that they were thinking about only the space tourism, one part of it, but you have given a much bigger picture of that. Okay, let us take a couple of questions also. I know we are slightly behind the schedule, but my apology for that, because we started a bit late. There are some internet issues in the beginning. One question is a very simple question. I think the fuel which is used in spacecraft, is it natural or man-made, created by chemicals, means using chemicals? Yeah, Dr. Punita, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, so it's a relatively technical question. I don't have a direct answer to this. I don't know if Professor Pant is there, then he might be able to.
Yeah, I think he is there. I think welcoming all our, yes, Dr. Pant, please. You can unmute. Rajesh, can you allow Dr. Rajkumar Pant to unmute?
Yeah, hello. Very good evening.
Yeah.
Very good evening. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
It's a very interesting question. Actually, to answer your question specifically, the fuel used in rockets is actually man-made. Natural fuels are not available today, which can be directly used for fuel. And so therefore, we have to create special kind of chemicals and binders to create rocket fuel. So it's not natural, it's man-made.
Okay. There's one more question. It's very something crazy. What will happen if we remove a space suit in space? Means if you go there and you remove your space suit, what will happen? I think some answers were there into that, but you can take it up, sir, or ma'am.
That's a very interesting question. Look, for orbital space flights, you would have to wear the space suits because the stressors on the human body are tremendous, and the sole purpose of going on the flight itself would be defeated because you may not be able to perform adequately at all. But for suborbital space flights, you don't need to wear space suits at all. In fact, even the pilots don't wear the space suits. Professor Pant, would you like to say something?
No, that's right. That's right. Depending on the loads that come, as you rightly mentioned, the G loads are manageable in the suborbital flights, and that's why passengers can go. You're right. So if you go into orbital flight or beyond that, you definitely need a spacesuit. Otherwise, you will cease to exist.
Yeah, I think in the presentation also they've shown how different changes you can see, how the blood pressure or they will move, and the change in your faces or maybe figure also. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. What kind of food do the astronauts or the space they eat in space? And what is this plus GX which you have shown in your slide also? Tanuja Verma, she wanted to know about.
So plus GX, as I said, is the chest to back force that you experience, the front to back force, and the plus GX that you experience. I'd mentioned in my slide also, there's a lot of tightness and pressure and difficulty in breathing, difficulty in seeing that you experience because of plus GX. And the second very interesting question is what kind of food do they eat? Yes, they don't eat the regular food that we eat. It has to be, pressurized and packed very separately. Most of it is dehydrated. And it's not as tasty and, absolutely not the way we make it over here. It is very differently packed with many minimal tastes. They just look at the nutrition point of it. And in fact, eating is also not very difficult. Imagine in microgravity, how are you going to hold the plate if the food is going to be all over? So that is why liquids are normally very difficult. And, they're more like balls and specifically packed food, very different. Very, very different topic by itself.
Okay, this you mentioned something about the gravity and its effect, I think, in one of your slides. So one question is related to that. Does the influence of gravity extend out forever? I mean, those who are going to space, when they come out, whether it will remain with them forever, or?
That will entirely depend on the duration that they have spent in the flight. If they're for very short durations, then it will hardly stay for a few, maybe minutes or something. But if you have stayed there, I mean, it all depends on the duration. It doesn't really stay forever, of course, but yes, you would have to undergo readaptation, and it could take some time to reverse all the changes. It also depends on what changes you have undergone.
Aarti wants to know about, because I have read this also about newspaper. There are some concern, I think Professor Pant and both of you can take up this. There's some environmental concern about this space tourism, the pollution, unlike means other tourism. If yes, how does it harm, and what is the kind of responsibility? And is there any governing authority who can take care of this? You talked about some regulators. Dr. Pant, would you like to take up that?
Yeah, actually, this is a very interesting thing. This topic is still being studied and reviewed. Right now, the activity that is happening in space tourism is very minuscule. So therefore, it is not like the current aviation scene or the current transportation scene, where hundreds of thousands of vehicles are moving around. So therefore, we have not reached a stage. In fact, I would say that the space debris is a bigger problem compared to the pollution caused by spacecraft right now. But obviously, as the number of these activities increases, there will be pressure to somehow try to bring in some environmental regulations. But to the best of my knowledge, right now, there are no regulations restricting emissions in spacecraft. We have very strong regulations for restriction of emissions in the aircraft, but in spacecraft, I have not heard of any such regulations.
Okay, perhaps that's why there are a lot of junk. They talk about space junk, and particularly in space. Okay. A very simple question. Is there any age limit for space tourism?
Yes, that's an interesting question. No, there is no age limit. You've seen the people who have gone up to space, but I've read that the minimum age is 18 years because you have to sign a consent. Yeah. So only from that perspective, it is 18 years, but there's no upper age limit.
Okay. Yeah, upper that they have shown, I think, Jeff and his companion.
They went. There was an 82-year-old.
83 years, correct. सर एक क्वेश्चन हिंदी में पूछा गया है, मैं हिंदी में ही उसको बोलता हूँ. क्या अंतरिक्ष में नेविगेशन सिस्टम है? अगर नहीं तो क्या बनाया जा सकता है?
अंतरिक्ष में जो नेविगेशन है वो एक्चुअली सितारों से होता है. इसको कहते हैं सेलेस्टियल नेविगेशन. कि उस पॉइंट पे आप कहेंगे जीपीएस या कोई और चीज तो काम नहीं करेगी. तो सेलेस्टियल नेविगेशन होता है, या एक और होता है जिसको कहते हैं इनर्शियल नेविगेशन सिस्टम, जिसमें हम शुरू से लेके अंत तक एक रिकॉर्ड रखते हैं कि हमारा स्पेसक्राफ्ट ने कितना डिस्टेंस, कितना एक्सेलरेशन किया. उससे हम प्रोजेक्ट भी कर सकते हैं, बट वो इतना रिलायबल नहीं है. तो सेलेस्टियल नेविगेशन ज्यादा popular.
I mean, those fixed stars and constellations, they are
relative location of stars, constellations, etc., are used to determine where you are.
It's something like as you are in some jungle and you don't have any equipment or something. So
जो लोग जहाजों में जाते हैं समुद्र में, they also celestial navigation.
Okay. Does water available in a spacecraft? So, if not, then what kind of liquid are allowed? Though,
I think this madam should answer, because I think liquids are anyway not much permitted, as she said rightly.
Yeah, I think ma'am also has told that. Yeah, ma'am, you can add to that.
Yeah, so liquids, as I said, are restricted because of various reasons, and especially the way you drink liquids is very special, because imagine it's spilling over. In fact, I would encourage these students to watch very interesting videos online, how they brush their teeth, how they do their daily basic cleaning and activities. Very, very interesting. Worth taking a look at. If you see it in real time, it's very fascinating. So if you give them all the answers, then they will not want to search anything for themselves. Very, very interesting ways of doing it.
The kind of food they are taking and how they are packed, I think our audience, I'll request, man, as I said, we are going to open Aerospace after renovation of that. So we have got a full bag of that space food from Russia. So we are going to display it. Maybe when you will be coming, you can see how they are packed and in what format they are. Though we will not be able to open them, but at least it will give you an idea. Means what is written over there. We'll translate it.
So we can't taste it, but we can see it.
Yeah, you can taste it. Okay.
It is very dried and desiccated.
Yeah, not very tasty.
You won't regret not tasting.
Okay, there are many more questions. One is there a risk or chance of hitting an object or debris in space while space tourism? How much it is and what are ways to reduce the risk?
Well, there is a risk always, because when you are going into space, it is a uncharted territory and you are not keeping a track on all the other objects. So there is always a risk. Okay, but the calculations have shown that the risk is a very, very small percentage. Other things can go wrong with higher probability than the impact of any flying body.
But these means a kind of space debris are there mostly for space tourism height, which MS told some 100 kilometers or so. At that level, perhaps they may be very, very rare.
No, debris can come even at low Earth orbit. It can come. Some satellites have been hit by small particles. In the space station has been hit. ISS has had so much of damage by impact of small particles.
Like this domestic means of flights and all that, they get damaged sometimes with birds. So
that happens at low altitude. Birds don't go. The birds are not there above about.
No, not that at height. Yeah.
They don't fly at such a height.
Okay. So I think there may be one more, but I think it is already 5:54. Should we continue with that, or maybe, I think we are end up with questions also. If more are there, perhaps we can share it on email and then take up.
Yeah, I think that is a better idea. I mean,
yeah.
Anybody who has a question, they can send a mail to you. And
Yes.
then if you forward to us as a consolidated email, we can try to put in an answer.
I think that will be better
Definitely.
idea, because we will not be able to take up each and every question in this short span of time. So let me conclude it by saying a big thank you to Dr. Punita, as well as the entire team of Aeronautical Society of India Mumbai branch. With them we are always organizing one very popular program, an established one, which is almost now, I think it is silver jubilee year. It's called Aviation Day. And last time we did it on online, and perhaps this time also we'll go online, and because that has given much wider reach. Earlier it used to be for Mumbai school, but now we are going much more. I think so. With this, I think Mr. Kulkarni, you would like to say a couple of lines, then we can conclude this.
Yes, sir, definitely. My question to Dr. Punita, did you travel to space, ma'am? Because such a wonderful presentation, as if you are taking us to space, all the answers and the presentation what you have shown, it was really awesome, ma'am. We were into space.
I took you to space. We traveled together to space.
And thanks to Neuro Science Center, what a lovely idea about space tourism, to bring this to all the young students what you are watching this and asking the questions. Really, it's a wonderful talk, and we want such kind of talk should be much more, sir.
So we will actually, you can suggest the topics. In fact, I have requested already Dr. Pan, because he's that how airplane flies very soon. I think I will take a date from him, and we'll come back, and then children will enjoy that.
I would like to talk to students about, I want to talk to students about what you see behind me, because this is something new.
Airship.
Many people don't know about it, and
yes.
very mysterious to many students.
So,
at some point of time, I'll be very happy to talk about this.
Yeah.
You are mute.
Sorry, mute.
Okay, so means we have shown these airship, small model that fish, and by control with means Dr. Pant and his team from IIT Bombay, they have shown live demonstration of these and controlling taking it from, in fact, in Lucknow also I invited him, and it was because that was a much bigger and much having much higher height available. It was really interesting. So when we'll be opening up and when physical visits will be allowed, perhaps we will have that live demonstration once again. So I would like to conclude it now. It's just 3 minutes to 6. Once again, thanking you all, to all our audience, and also to our director, because it was his idea that very soon we should have a lecture on space tourism because it's the current topic. And then I contacted Dr. Pant, and immediately everything happened and it took shape. So thank you very much, each and everyone. And for a nice presentation, Dr. Punita, you have taken really a good pain to collect all data and a lot of things you have told. So it is not easy, but I think it's an eye-opener if you are planning maybe in future spending a lot on this tourism or recreation, but you have to prepare a lot also, which Dr. Punita has told you. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Pant, for sparing time. And okay. Namaskar to all of you. Stay home, stay safe, and take care of yourself.
Bye.
Thank you.